The HTML DOM API. What is an API? An API simply stands for Application Programming Interface. And DOM, like you know, already stands for the Document Object Model. So now, if you now combine the two, the HTML DOM API, what exactly does it mean? The DOM API, Application Programming Interface, is a set of methods and properties that allow JavaScript to change the content, structure, and style of any HTML element. You can also put it this way, that the DOM API is a set of tools and rules that allow programming languages, usually JavaScript, to talk to your web browser. Think of a DOM API as a bridge between your code and the actual web page. What does that mean? You know, when you write your code, you write it in a code editor of your choice. But when you want to check what that code looks like, or when you want to check the output of whatever you write in your code editor, you usually need a way to preview it, which is usually in the web browser. Now, the DOM API now acts like a bridge between that your web page and your code that you have in your code editor. And how it works is that the DOM is like a tree of nodes in your browser. When a browser loads a web page, it will convert all the HTML into a tree of objects. So what that means again is this. Now, this is a page. Let me refresh this. So we have this page as it is now. And then if you look at it, you see this. You can see all this HTML has been converted into a tree of objects. You can see the more you click, it will keep going down, and then it will be showing you how each element is nested inside of each other. So tags like the H1, the P, or div, they become a node in that tree. Now, the application programming interface, which is the API, is now the list of commands that you can use to mess with this tree. So, for example, say you want to manipulate HY, you want to change it, or you want to mess with the content, then you can use the API to communicate that and do that. Say you want to change the content of P tag or header or main or section, then the application programming interface allows you to do that. And how it allows you to do that is by some of the methods and properties that are already built into the language that you can just call in your code and then use them to perform whatever effects that you want to do on this element or on the tag in your code. An API method is an action that you can do on an HTML element. So method is an action that you can do on an HTML element. An API property is a value that you can access on an HTML element. Now, these two are not the same. An API method is different from an API property. And the difference between them is that one is an action, while the other is a value. So you can always access the other one on an HTML element, while you can always do the initial one on an HTML element. So with the DOM API, what are the capabilities? What can you even do with it? Because without the DOM API, all web pages will just look static, like a PDF. There will be no effect. There will be nothing like, changing of content, changing of style, or react to users, or do things like, a menu pop-up when the button is clicked, or you changing from a white mode to a dark mode. Things like that we see in modern website. So all those things wouldn't have been possible. Adding and removing of elements to a list instantly, all those things will not be possible without things like this API, without things like the DOM API. So these are some of the usefulness of the DOM API in JavaScript. So in summary, the HTML is the house. The HTML opening and closing tag is what contains every other things that will go along in your code. So it's like the house. And this DOM API is like a control panel that lets you do things like maybe in your home now, you want to move your chairs around, you want to change the position of where your fan or AC is, you want to change the position of your television. Those things are things that you do inside the house, even with the presence of people. But then all of those activities are still contained inside the house in which you are doing it. So this is a perfect illustration of what a DOM API is like in JavaScript. So let's move on and look at the DOM API abilities. So I just want to use an example so that you understand this better. So now I'll close this and look at what we have here. So I'll come inside my script tag and I will make a simple paragraph. So I want to access an element. And how do I access an element? I need an ID. It's the most used way of accessing elements in JavaScript. And what is my ID name? So I have an element here, a div, and it has an ID of demo. So that is what I'm trying to access here. Now that I've accessed this element, then I want to change the content of this element. So I can just say my content dot. How do I change the content? I need a way to interact with that element. So I will call the inner HTML, which happens to be a property of the element that I'm trying to interact with, and change its content to something like welcome to Brazil. And right here on my screen, you can see welcome to Brazil. So I can change this to anything I want. I can say Lorem 30 Lorem Ipsum. Lorem Ipsum. So what makes this possible? This is what makes this possible. This method is what allows me to be able to interact with these elements. Now, what you are seeing on the screen is coming from this my content. But then, if you look at this space itself, how is it represented in the HTML? How is it represented in the DOM tree? Look at the way it is being represented. Is this div? So it has a class and it also has an ID. So the space itself is where I'm picking the ID that, okay, this is the location where I want my output to appear. And that is why you are seeing it as it is here. So for example, now, if I want this content to show here, I just need to add an ID. Now, just take a look at this now. If I add an ID and call it, I can call it anything, say hello. And now if I change this from demo to hello, let's see what happens. Now you can see that the position of where the output is changing has shifted to where the ID I'm calling is. So this is how you can use the DOM API in order to interact with the elements that are available inside your DOM. So the document is the HTML document. The get element by ID, which is this, is a document method. And this demo, get element by ID demo, this is what will retrieve the ID of the element you want to manipulate. And this is an element property itself. And what we have here changes the property. Now, the DOM API provides us with the ability to find and select elements, change elements, content and attributes, add, remove, or modify elements, change CSS style, add event listener to react to user input. So these are some of the abilities of what the DOM API allow us to do in JavaScript.